Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. Just days after President Donald Trump again questioned what the United States gets out of NATO, alliance leaders are arriving in Ankara for a summit that will test both unity and credibility. With debates over defense spending, Europe's growing military role, and continued support for Ukraine all converging, the meeting could shape NATO's direction for years to come. Joining us now to discuss it all further is Keir Giles, Senior Consulting Fellow in the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House. Good to have you with us. Welcome.
Good morning.
So, unfortunately, we are now used to these very mercurial comments by President Donald Trump. But nevertheless, having said that so close to the summit, it starts on Tuesday. These words from Friday, again, questioning the alliance, questioning what the U.S. has ever gotten out of it. Will that have any bearing on his mood and policy during the summit?
Well, it's entirely possible, but as we know, there's a big difference sometimes between what Donald Trump puts out on social media and what the United States then actually decides to do. The bigger problem is not the messaging about the defense spending, which has been fairly consistent. It seems to be now that Donald Trump has fundamentally misunderstood the purpose of NATO, because his grievance with the alliance is that it did not support the United States fully in its war on Iran, which of course every other alliance member knows is not what NATO is for. So there could be an even deeper challenge to the fundamental structure of the alliance and the United States' role in it than the ongoing dispute over some European allies failing to take an interest in providing for their own defense.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point there. I mean, one of the things that are so pivotal for NATO is we talk a lot about it, Article 5, this one for all for one. At the same time, there is evidence, and this was pointed out some months ago to President Trump, that actually it was collectively NATO, and the only time during that security where they all came together, which was after September 11th in Afghanistan. So, but he's still pushing the Iran point here. Why is he doing that, do you think? And can we get any kind of, let's say, a different type of President Trump to understand NATO by the end of the summit?
Well, Trump has been determined not to understand NATO throughout the whole of his terms in office. Let's not forget, during the whole of the first term, the NATO spending deficit by individual countries on their own defense, Trump seemed to think was a deficit of what they were supposed to be paying to the United States in a form of protection racket. So the hopes for actually getting through what exactly NATO is and is not, I think, are fairly slim. Trump seems to be convinced that NATO is in effect an equivalent to the Warsaw Pact, where all of the members take orders from the United States and go to war on US commands. Now that, of course, is a problem which will be recognized by other people within the Trump orbit. He is surrounded by people who have a better understanding of exactly what NATO is, and the question is how much of an influence those more level-headed advisors can have on any instant Trump decisions that might come out of this summit.
But on that point, I mean, it's complex to understand, but also I think important for our viewers to know, if we have those kind of decisions on terms of command, about potentially also in terms of weaponry, where that's assigned, where it's licensed out or not, ownership, how does that work? Is that a unilateral decision by a country, or is that all countries involved in all this?
Well, countries are free, of course, to make their own bilateral arrangements. When it works through NATO, however, we've seen the outsized influence of the United States. For instance, with weapon supplies to Ukraine, it was a structure set up under the aegis of NATO, but led very much by the United States up until, of course, the second Trump presidency, when it was handed off to European states. So there are processes that can go through NATO, there are processes that can work independently, but in all of these, the role and the weight of the US is outsized. It takes up a large number of positions in the NATO command structure, for example. And the important point there, of course, is that all of that is still working. Despite all of the newspaper headlines we've had about possible withdrawals or possible additional deployments of US forces to Europe, most of them in the direction of withdrawals, of course, most people are still there. Most American servicemen who are assigned to NATO, assigned to Europe, are still in place and are still doing their jobs. It's any sudden upheaval to that on a large scale that European allies are particularly concerned about, as well, of course, as questioning the overall commitment of the United States to NATO on the basis of a sudden Trump whim.
And also at the same time, and as you said, things are still working as they are. I mean, one of the main concentrations still has been also very much support for Ukraine in various different forms. I mean, that will clearly be on the agenda as well. President Zelenskyy also in attendance in Ankara. There will likely be, following a phone call that Zelenskyy had with Trump just over the weekend. What do you expect Zelenskyy's goal to be in this? What kind of discussions could those two presidents be having on the sidelines?
Well, in one regard, the goal for Ukraine has always been the same. It's maximizing the support that goes to Ukraine in order to serve as the front line of Europe and to hold back the Russian threat and to diminish the Russian threat for every other member state of Europe. But of course, how that has achieved has been shifting over time. We had that disastrous conversation between Zelenskyy and Trump in February of 2025, and then Zelenskyy for the rest of 2025 serving to in effect pander to Trump world, to adopt the alternative reality of the Trump court rather than say exactly what was happening on the ground. That's shifted in 2026 with this greater Ukrainian initiative that they've been able to take in the war, with these demonstrations that they're not just on the back foot but in fact can carry the war to Russia. There's been a more assertive tone from Kyiv and from Zelenskyy. How exactly that will play out in private conversations, of course, we can't guess, but we can assume that Zelenskyy will be projecting a more confident tone at this summit than we've seen in the past.
Mm-hmm. And also in terms of, we just compare the summit from last year, that was The Hague, that was in the Netherlands, also now being led by Mr. Rutte himself, a former Prime Minister of the Netherlands as well. There was just a picture earlier where he was in the White House showing what he calls, I think the placard read, the Trump trillion, of trying to again convince President Trump how much he's been impactful in the alliance. This time around it's in Turkey. It's a different type of leader, Erdogan, and I think that they don't see Russia the same way as many other of the Europeans do. How much is the host country here, Turkey's role involved in this, and how will also that relationship work out on Trump?
Well, Turkey, of course, has its own regional security issues which are not all about Russia. It has other issues to deal with. It lives in a region which, in a way, is a crossover, all of the different security threats that cover Southeast Europe and the Middle East. So, yes, they'll have their own specific focus. But the role of Rutte as the Trump panderer, the Trump flatterer, the person who comes up with the very simplistic reductionist arguments about how exactly NATO works in order specifically to keep Trump on board, I still think is going to be very strong. Now, Rutte has attracted a lot of criticism and ridicule for the way he's gone about this, calling Trump daddy, explaining it as though Trump were a 5-year-old, but he's very clearly decided that that is his role, to try to keep the United States on board by engaging with its leader in terms that he can understand. So that, I expect, will probably continue in one form or another, regardless of the role of the host nation here.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then looking at the whole picture then, if we're looking at markers that are going to be indicators of, let's call it, success after this summit, is it keeping to status quo, any sort of higher levels of spending commitment, burden sharing, Article 5? What are we looking for at the end of the summit as something positive?
Well, some of the NATO experts that have been describing this have set fairly low bar for success. In other words, everything not falling apart. They're hoping that the project that they have at the moment for trying to drag up the defense spending and security spending of member states will stay on track with no further major disruptions from the United States. I think anything that meets those criteria will probably be hailed as a success if there's no obvious argument coming out in the final communique and the final statements between the United States and its European and Canadian allies.
Mm-hmm. And one quick one, in terms of, if we compare the summit to last year, a lot of it has been done, more defense spending, more production rollout. Is NATO stronger now? Let's say, is the European component stronger now than it was a year ago?
It certainly is stronger now, but of course we shouldn't confuse the accountancy tricks that some member states within Western Europe have undertaken to pretend that they're trying to meet these targets with actual real spending and real investment. There's been some performative announcements of numbers which is very different from the programs that the frontline states are undertaking to genuinely improve their defense capacity. And that may be one of the things that would be a bone of contention with the United States. We've already heard the US proposing a kind of scorecard for which of its NATO allies is actually genuinely meeting its commitments, and we shouldn't be surprised if that comes out during the course of the summit as well. Those that are considered to make the grade, which will definitely include, for example, Poland, and those that are lagging behind, which might include, for example, the United Kingdom.
All right, so much to look out for there as these next few days of the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey. Thanks so much for those insights. Much appreciated. Keir Giles there from Chatham House. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. But stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.